Sage of the Shadows, where dark whispers echo through the night.
Audio story, Blood Twins. Chapter 6, The Glass Between Us. Arina sprinted through the dense forest, each step a rebellion against the suffocating dread clawing at her. The moon hung high, spilling its pale light in fragmented beams through the canopy above, casting fleeting glimpses of the treacherous terrain ahead. Branches whipped at her skin, their sharp edges leaving thin, stinging scratches across her pale arms. Every snap of a twig beneath her boots sounded louder than it should, like a sharp accusation in the oppressive silence. Her breath hitched as she glanced back, her crimson eyes slicing through the darkness like razors. The forest was alive, but not in the way she'd hoped. It teemed with movement at the edges of her vision, spectral shapes weaving between the trees, there and gone in the blink of an eye. She wasn't just being followed, she was being hunted. The realization struck her with an icy finality. They were too clever, too coordinated. The silent watchers in the trees weren't in pursuit, they were hurting her. This was no aimless chase. It was a precision strike, calculated to leave her with no path but the one they dictated. A shadow darted ahead, melting into the blackened bark of the trees before she could focus on it. Another flickered to her left. Panic bloomed in her chest, cold and suffocating, as she pushed harder, forcing her body to defy its limits. How many are there? The thought spiraled, dragging her deeper into despair. It wasn't just a few, it couldn't be. This was too deliberate. A coven, perhaps? No, something bigger, more insidious. A network. Her pace faltered for a fraction of a second as her thoughts tangled, and dread coiled around her like a noose. The hunger gnawing at her core weakened her resolve, every step draining what little strength she had left. But surrender wasn't an option, not yet. The sound of heavy footfalls behind her tore through her focus. They were closing in now, no longer concerned with stealth. Each deliberate crunch of the underbrush was a promise, a taunt. They wanted her to hear them, to know that escape was a futile fantasy. Ahead, the forest broke open without warning, the tangled branches parting like curtains to reveal a moonlit clearing. Arina's legs carried her forward, her breath ragged as she stumbled out of the undergrowth. The sudden openness was disorienting, the change in terrain throwing her off balance. She staggered to a halt, her boots sliding on the damp grass as she took in the scene before her. The clearing was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves in the cold night air. Arina stood on the edge of the hill, the city below a constellation of lights that seemed impossibly distant. She could feel the weight of the shadows pressing against her back, circling like wolves around a wounded animal. Her crimson eyes darted between them, sharp and wary. They weren't closing in, not yet. They didn't have to. She took a step forward, the loose earth shifting beneath her boots. The cliff edge loomed closer. Below, the jagged rocks seemed to beckon her, promising an escape she wasn't sure she deserved. Arina. The voice cut through the stillness, deep, steady. She didn't turn, but she knew it was Togi. The man who had saved her life when she hadn't wanted it saved. The man who had brought her into his home without asking for her story. His family, his life, she was an intruder, an unknown. I told you, his voice rang out, colder than the night air. I can't let you go until I know you're not a threat. She didn't face him yet, her fists clenching at her sides, the tension in her body coiling like a spring ready to snap. A threat? Her voice cracked, the bitterness barely veiling the raw pain. To who? To you? To your family? She shook her head, her gaze fixed on the ground, the weight of his accusation sinking into her chest like a stone. Do you really think I could hurt them? She looked back at the moment he didn't expect. From Togi's eyes, Arina saw something more than suspicion, something darker, an urgency that told her it wasn't just his family he was worried about. How could it be? Together, they could outnumber her easily. But there was something else, something unsaid. She saw his hands twitch, the tiniest flicker of hesitation and readiness. It wasn't fear. It was something sharper, more dangerous. For the first time, a cold, logical thought slithered into her mind. When she spoke to his family, it was clear they didn't approve of human killings. Were they trying to protect them? Or was it something else? The possibility of what this implied tightened her chest. That's not the point, Togi shot back. I saved you. But instead of thanking me, you attacked me. His words were calculated, but there was a slight tremor beneath them, the edge of something more personal. Arina's instincts told her it wasn't just about his actions. It was about the way she had turned his world upside down without meaning to. The dissonance between their worlds made him uneasy. Her laugh was a sharp, broken sound, foreign and jagged in the cold air. I didn't need saving, she spat, her voice trembling with the weight of past regret, the bitterness cutting through her. You think I wanted your help? The air between them thickened, a charged silence hanging like a fragile thread between two forces poised to snap. Togi's jaw tightened, his green eyes unreadable. He took a step forward, his posture wary but purposeful, never breaking eye contact. Every muscle in his body coiled, ready for anything. Arina's own body tensed in response, the anticipation crawling up her spine like a creeping frost. He was closing the distance. Was he planning to attack? His stance suggested it. His next move could change everything, one wrong step, one careless gesture, and it would shatter into violence. Every breath felt like a prelude to a storm, thick with the electricity of their confrontation. Her red eyes flashed with fury. You don't know anything about me, she hissed, her voice low, laced with venom. You think you understand me? You think you know what I've been through? Her breath came sharp, ragged, her chest tightening with the weight of everything unsaid. Togi's eyes softened for just a heartbeat, but his expression remained guarded. He took another step, closer now, and Arina could feel his presence pressing in on her like a storm cloud about to burst. But still, his gaze never wavered from hers. You're not the only one who's had to fight to survive. The tension between them became unbearable, suffocating. The quiet between them seemed to hum, a vibrating promise that something, anything, could ignite this brittle, fractured silence. They stood there, locked in place, waiting, daring the other to make a move. Arina couldn't admit the truth, not even to herself. He had cracked something open in her, made her question things she wasn't ready to face. But her pride was all she had left. She had to hold on to it. You're right, she muttered, her voice cracking, her chest tight with emotion she couldn't release. But I'm not like you. The words hung heavy between them. Something unspoken, an ocean of things that she couldn't say, that she wouldn't say. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't sure of the truth anymore. What was she really fighting for? I can see that you're afraid, Togi said firmly, though his voice betrayed a trace of uncertainty. An undercurrent of something that unnerved him, something he couldn't quite place. Her hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms, her body stepping closer to him, but not to strike. Afraid, she spat, her voice rising, defiant and sharp. I'm not afraid of you. But let's make one thing clear, you don't know me. The air around them seemed to freeze, their every movement suspended in time. Every twitch, every breath felt like it could be the one to break it. But still, neither made a move, not yet. She would never admit fear. Not after everything, not after she had lost so much already. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She could scream, shout at him, unleash every bit of rage inside her, but the words wouldn't come. Only silence. I don't, Togi admitted quietly, his voice steady but layered with something darker, a knowing that seemed to catch at the back of her throat. But I know you're still fighting, even if you don't want to admit it. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, and for a fleeting moment, the rawness of his words cut through her defenses. Fury and pain waged war inside her, a battle she couldn't win. You can't save me, she whispered, the words small, broken, each one pulling her deeper into the darkness she'd chosen. Arina had already decided, survival wasn't the goal. There was something more, a purpose, a mission she wouldn't share. It was all she had left. I'm not trying to save you, Togi replied, his voice shifting, softer now, almost gentle. I'm trying to stop you from giving up on yourself. The weight of his words struck her like a physical blow. It felt like he'd ripped something out of her chest, exposing the raw, shattered pieces beneath. But even in that moment of vulnerability, the shadows pressed in, suffocating. Her breath caught, and for a brief, maddening moment, Something flickered in her chest. A cold, victorious smile spread across her lips. It wasn't just defiance, it was a challenge, one she knew he would never understand. Her red eyes danced with something dark, something playful, as though she were toying with him, letting him believe she might strike at any moment. It was a calculated look, meant to distract, to confuse him. Togi's heart skipped a beat. She had played him, no, used him. Her gaze was too knowing, too deliberate, and in that moment, he understood. Arina wasn't rattled. She wasn't emotional. She was thinking, calculating, planning her next move. He had miscalculated, and the realization struck him harder than he expected. Arina wasn't who he thought she was. Before he could react, she was already in motion. She didn't hesitate. She leapt. The darkness swallowed her. Arina. Togi's shout tore through the night air, desperate, but she was already falling, her body weightless in the void. In the space of a heartbeat, everything shifted. The game had changed. Arina had already made her choice. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the sound of her landing reached him, a sharp, solid thud. Arina's knees hit the earth below with a jarring force that shot pain through her legs, but she pushed off immediately, stumbling into a sprint. Her breaths were ragged, her vision blurred by the adrenaline and the wind whipping past her face. Her chest burned as she weaved through the forest, every step carrying her farther away from the cliff and the man who had tried to stop her. The shadows, cold and suffocating, slithered through the trees behind her, their presence growing closer, heavier, with every passing second. She didn't dare look back. Her limbs screamed in protest, but she forced herself to keep running. The city lights grew brighter now, a faint promise of safety that flickered at the edge of her vision. But her mind was a storm of doubt, fear, and despair. Would she ever outrun them? Would she ever escape herself? Her foot caught on a root, sending her sprawling forward. She hit the ground hard, her palms scraping against the earth. The pain jolted her, sharp and electric. She gasped, twisting around, crimson eyes wide as she scanned the darkness. The shadows loomed. They hadn't stopped. They never would. Still, she forced herself to her feet, staggering forward, the city lights closer than ever. Just a little farther, she muttered to herself, her voice a desperate whisper. Just a little farther.